And good afternoon. You're listening to Ken Hudnall. This is the Ken Hudnall Show. Coming to you from our studios right here in exciting El Paso, Texas. Gateway to the Old West and the most haunted city in the country. Well, today is January 29th day of this new year. There's 336 days remain to the year's over with, and we get to start a new one. Holidays and observances. It's National Puzzle Day. From jigsaws to Rubik's Cubes, crosswords to riddles, gives your brain a rewarding workout, or you can actually invent a brand new puzzle of your own. National Corn Chip Day, Seeing Eye Guide Dog Anniversary, and Kansas Day. RNLISOS Day. Let's see, I'm not familiar with that one. I thought I'd been through all these. It's an event celebrated annually to support the Royal National Lifeboat Institution. This day focuses on raising funds and awareness for the Lifeboat Institution that provides essential life-saving services around the coast of the UK and Ireland. Communities come together to celebrate and contribute to this noble cause. There's all kinds of celebrations in all kinds of different places. Curmudgeon's Day, raise a cheer for the lovable grumps that add a dash of comedy to our lives. Free Thinkers Day, National Carnation Day, Family Mediation Week, Suits and Sneakers for Cancer Week, Artes Mundi, Catholic Schools Week, National School Choice Week, and Snow Sculpting Week. We had some snow here on Sunday, which was a rare event, let me tell you. Famous people born on this date: Tom Selleck, Magnum P.I., Catherine Ross, Sarah Gilbert, Adam Lambert, and William McKinley. Well, on that note, let's see what stories we have in the news, because there's always something going on. Well, the UK has reversed courses on territory handover after fierce criticism from President Trump. The UK reopens Chagos Islands talks with the US after Trump criticized the deal. The talks between the UK and the U.S. hold the future of the Chagos Islands in the Indian Ocean, reportedly reopened after President Trump's comments cast doubt over an agreement that would see Britain hand sovereignty of the strategically vital archipelago to Mauritius. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer confirmed on Wednesday the UK had reopened discussions after the president had panned the deal and branded it an act of great stupidity. Shockingly, according to President Trump, our brilliant NATO ally, the UK, currently planning to give away the island of Diego Garcia, site of a vital U.S. military base, to Mauritius, and do so for no reason whatsoever. He posted that on True Social. There's no doubt that China and Russia have noticed this act of total weakness. He said the UK giving away extremely important land is an act of great stupidity and is another in a long line of national security reasons why Greenland has to be acquired. National security, don't you know? Well, medical watchdog is unloaded on the VCU after a nurse fired for viral anti-ICE TikTok video suggested drugging agents. Head of a medical watchdog group unleashed on Virginia Commonwealth University after a nurse at the school's hospital lost her job over a TikTok video. Went viral for all the wrong reasons. We documented at Do No Harm, VCU has a long history of pushing extreme identity politics into medical education and clinical treatment. And Do No Harm, which is the medical watchdog, executive director Christina Rasmussen told Fox News, and now they act surprised when radicalism spouts from ground seeded with toxic ideology. group represents employees and students in the medical field, as well as patients and policymakers who are fighting to keep identity politics out of medical education, research, and clinical practice. Do No Harm often pushes back against DEI initiatives and youth-focused gender ideology in medicine. The part of the problem is the liberals who run these programs have their own view of how the world's supposed to be. It doesn't make any difference if it's right or wrong. It's their view. Kind of like a male pretending to be a female or a female pretending to be male. There's no reality check involved. Well, a Georgia assistant principal is accused of stealing nearly $1,000 in Walmart merchandise at a self-checkout. An assistant principal at a Georgia elementary school was arrested last Monday after being linked to a series of Walmart shoplifting incidents. Roughly $1,000 worth of merchandise was taken using a discrete stacking method at self-checkout kiosk, according to Fox 5 in Atlanta. Courtney Janelle Shaw, 47, was reportedly caught on camera placing multiple items on top of one another and scanning only one before exiting the store. She was booked into the Cherokee County Jail, charged with one felony count of shoplifting, and released later that day on a $4,875 bond. That's according to the local outlet Cherokee Tribune. Authorities reportedly said Shaw stole 98 items totaling $943.93 between November and December of last year. Free Home Elementary School in Cherokee County said the two-decade veteran educator and mother of one was placed on administrative leave. Well, I've seen a lot of strange things at Walmart. In fact, we don't even go there much anymore. Well, Team Canada found to have manipulated competition that cost Americans a shot at the Milan Cortina Olympics. Investigation by the International Bobsleigh and Skeleton Federation found that Team Canada manipulated the outcome of the North American Cup at Lake Placid, New York earlier this month. Canada's actions denied American Olympian Katie Umlander a chance to earn enough points to qualify for the upcoming Milan Cortina Winter Games. After Team Canada withdrew 4 athletes from North American Cup, it reduced the amount of points the competition could award. Reduction made it mathematically impossible for Umlander to earn enough points to qualify. She's a 5-time Olympian, was hoping to qualify for her 6th Winter Games, but lost a chance before competition even began at Lake Placid due to Canada's withdrawals. Well, it's there's cheating everywhere, folks, even in major elections. Well, Home Depot's cut 800 jobs, ordered corporate staff back to the office full-time. The Atlanta-based retailer says its goal is to deliver greater quality, and it announced yesterday it was eliminating 800 jobs tied to its Atlanta store support center. The company also said it was require its corporate employees to return to the office full-time 5 days a week. We're simplifying our corporate operations to better support our stores and our customers, Home Depot said in a statement to Fox Business. Changes include a reduction in roles associated with our store support center and transition to a 5-day in-office schedule for our corporate staff. The company said its goal is to drive greater agility and position the company to move faster and stay more closely connected to our frontline associates. Yet as much as I enjoy shopping at Home Depot, it's could become quite a interesting visit when you go to that store. Filipino mayor is unharmed after an apparent RPG attack on his car in broad daylight. Filipino mayor escaped unharmed after an apparent rocket-propelled grenade attack on his convoy in broad daylight Sunday in the southern province of Maguindanao del Sur, according to authorities. Philippine news agency, the country's state-run news outlet, reported that Mayor Ahmad Patuan was inside the bulletproof vehicle when the attack occurred at about 6:30 in the morning. Video of the incident shows two men stepping out of a white van, one holding what appeared to be an RPG and another carrying a gun. One of the men then lowers the launcher and aims it down the street. And, they don't seem to realize there's cameras everywhere. Well, the mayor was unharmed. Well, a 2010 clip of President Obama has gone viral where he defends deportations, even of those just trying to earn a living. The clip warned that halting deportations would trigger a surge in illegal immigration, and that the clip is going viral. The post made on the social media platform X fuels sharp divisions over ICE deportation raids launched since President Trump came back to the White House. As one of the talking heads said in a newscast, anything said by a Democratic president is the gospel. Anything said by President Trump is evil and has to be stamped out. And while some critics condemn the deportation of otherwise law-abiding illegal immigrants, others argue such mass deportations were not only President Trump's flagship promise, but also a norm among past Democratic administrations. Obama was criticized by activists and media outlets during his presidency for deporting illegal immigrants who had little or no serious criminal history beyond crossing the border illegally, earned him the nickname Deporter-in-Chief among some critics. But when Biden came in, the doors were open. Come on down. We'll give you anything you want. Well, Rob Schneider, the wife, has filed for divorce after 15 years of marriage. Patricia Schneider filed for divorce from Rob Schneider in Maricopa County, according to Fox News. Patricia is 37, quietly filed dissolution of marriage paperwork last month in Arizona to end her 15-year marriage to the former Saturday Night Live star. Rob and Patricia have two minor daughters together, Miranda Scarlett and Madeline Robbie. Fox News reached out to Snyder's rep for comment, and Snyder was previously married to actress Helena Snyder for 3 years before their divorce in 2005. Also the father of the country singer Ella King. And we've had a few online interactions with him. And seems like a nice guy, but you never know. Well, there's a video that's come to light that shows nurse Alex Preddy spit at federal agents and violently damaged SUV days before the fatal CBP shooting. New video shows him damaging a government SUV days before he was fatally shot. The news movement released the video, reportedly recorded January 13th on Wednesday, showing a man resembling Preddy with a beard and glasses and clothing similar to what he was wearing when he was killed. Man is seen shouting and spitting at federal agencies before he kicked the taillight of a federal SUV, causing it to break. And then he shouted F you repeatedly and flashed double middle fingers. Agents got out of the vehicle and approached him and took him to the ground. Agents sprayed pepper balls and tear gas toward a nearby crowd of agitators as the altercation continued. Though the man was ultimately released after stepping away from agents, what appears to be a gun is visible in his waistband. Well, bringing a gun to a riot is probably one of the stupidest things you can do. Unfortunately, there's a lot of stupid people out there. Well, a second teen has died after a Texas sledding accident that killed the best friend. Apparently, they were holding on to each other. This critically injured in a sledding accident that killed her best friend, according to their families and local police. The Frisco police confirmed Wednesday a second 16-year-old girl died of her injuries at the hospital. The teen's family identified her as Grace Brito. The other teen killed was earlier identified as Elizabeth Angle. Grace's mother, Tracy Brito, told Fox 4 Dallas-Fort Worth her daughter just got her driver's license 2 months ago and been excited to sign up as an organ donor. We're still here going through the organ donation process to honor Gracie's wishes, Tracy told the outlet. She was a selfless person, always wanted to make others smile and be happy. God took a good one away too far too soon. Elizabeth's mother, Megan Angle, wrote that the girls were besties in a Facebook post after Grace's death. She wrote, "I find some comfort knowing they're in heaven together." Well, it would have been a whole lot better had they remained here together, but that's just me. Well, transgender Antifa extremist charged with attempted murder after skating on a death threat, according to Representative Mace. A violent Antifa extremist and transgender suspect allegedly posted a graphic assassination threat against Representative Nancy Mace is now charged with attempted murder, months after prosecutors ignored warnings the suspect was dangerous. That's a failure, Mace said, allowed a preventable shooting to happen. Mace is a Republican from South Carolina, said the arrest of Michael Richard Fadish, who goes by the name Rim Heathen, came months after she reported what she described as a clear death threat. Prosecutors declined to prosecute it. See, the problem is that prosecuting somebody is work, and you can work up a good sweat doing that. And these prosecutors want their paychecks and they want their benefits, but they don't want to work, so they just turn a blind eye to threats against those evil Republicans, of course. In May of 2025, Fadish posted a graphic on Instagram depicting a gun pointed directly at Mace's face. According to Mace, the message was unmistakable. He wanted her dead. Her office reported the threat to authorities, but of course it was ignored. After all, she's one of those evil Republicans. Well, a driver rams a car repeatedly into the doors of a New York City Jewish site. Suspect's been arrested. Driver was taken into custody yesterday after police say the individual intentionally and repeatedly rammed a vehicle into the Chabad Lubavitch World Headquarters in New York City, damaging some of the Jewish site's doors. NYPD and Chabad Lubavitch spokesperson Marty Seligson said there were no apparent injuries. Vehicles inspected by the NYPD bomb squad, no explosives were found. Driver shouted to bystanders it slipped and said something to police about attempting to park. And, of course, wanted to park in the main aisle of the Jewish Center. Well, according to Laura Ingraham, resisting ICE is a religion to some of the leftists. And they have to practice their religion, don't you know? Well, a major nor'easter is going to bomb out the Carolinas in a threat zone for heavy snow and intense wind. Powerful nor'easters brewing along the East Coast are going to take aim on the Carolinas, Virginia, and the mid-Atlantic states as it rapidly intensifies into what's called a bomb cyclone. Well, we'll see how that plays out. Well, Gulf shipping operations have grinded to a halt near Iran. The U.S. is quietly prepares for a possible strike. The risk has been heightened. Shipping in the Persian Gulf dipped sharply on Wednesday as tensions with Iran intensified amid signs the U.S. was positioning military forces for a potential strike. That's according to maritime intelligence assessments. U.S. Navy's USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group entered the U.S. Central Command area of responsibility on Monday. A U.S. official confirmed that to Fox News Digital as President Trump continued to keep military options on the table. It's going to keep on till we're going to finally have that war everybody's wanting. Melania Trump has opened up about son Barron's campaign role, life behind the scenes before the 2025 inauguration. The First Lady let Fox News in on her documentary Melania, which opens Friday and offers a rare behind-the-scenes look at her life leading back to the White House. Joining the Five on Wednesday, Trump said filming consumed her life day to night and revealed that her son Barron played a key role in President Trump's 2024 campaign. She told Fox News, "That was my life, so whatever I did, the cameras were following me. So from morning till evening and everything I needed to do, organizing, moving back to the White House, my family preparing for inauguration, my business, my philanthropy, all in all, establishing the East Wing office and hiring people. That was my life during that time frame." Well, Senate Democrat is fired back after Vice President Vance makes a Forrest Gump comparison. Democratic Senator Tammy Duckworth of Illinois fired back at Vice President Vance after he likened her sparring session with Secretary of State Marco Rubio during a Senate Foreign Relations Committee hearing about America's Venezuela policy to an argument between the fictional character Forrest Gump and Isaac Newton. Watching Tammy Duckworth obsessively interrupt Marco Rubio during this hearing is like watching Forrest Gump argue with Isaac Newton, he quipped on a X post on Wednesday. Duckworth responded, Forrest Gump ran toward danger of Vietnam. Your boss ran to his podiatrist, crying bone spurs. Petty insults at the expense of people with disabilities won't change the fact you're risking troops' lives to boost Chevron's stock price. It's my job to hold you accountable. Well, if they really did their job, it would be a different situation. But instead, they've got their own agendas. Well, an Illinois teen has stabbed a pregnant woman 70 times, knifes a dog, and sets a home on fire during a Facebook Marketplace meetup. This Illinois teenager is arrested for allegedly stabbing a pregnant mother to death and attacking her pet dog with a knife before setting the woman's home on fire. Nidas Ravukas, 19, is facing several charges, including first-degree murder, intentional homicide of an unborn child, animal cruelty, armed robbery, and arson. He allegedly stabbed Eliza Morales, 30, dozens of times in her Downs Grove apartment unit on Monday. That's according to the Downers Grove police. The Ravukas responded to a Facebook Marketplace listing for a red 1994 Ford Ranger pickup truck that Morales' husband posted on Saturday. Investigators said Ravukas visited the Morales home to view the truck and later left with it while it still had Morales' license plates, according to Fox 32. He arranged to meet at the couple's apartment building on Monday to return the plates and obtain a bill of sale. Well, unfortunately, it kind of went out of control. Somebody wound up dying. In fact, 2 people wound up dying. Well, we're going to turn to our main topic for today. We're talking about some of the strangest conspiracy theories anybody's ever heard of. You know, one of the worst periods of this country's history was Pearl Harbor. And it could easily be argued that the attack on Pearl Harbor was one of the humanity's major turning points. The events of December 7th, 1941 set in motion a process that would eventually lead to the dropping of mankind's most powerful weapon, the nuclear bomb, as well as set the scene for the eventual Cold War, potentially driving our species to leave the Earth for the first time and take our steps on the surface of the moon. Well, the attack was described by then President Franklin D. Roosevelt as a date that'll live in infamy. Well, according to what history tells us, Japan launched an unprovoked attack against our naval forces in Hawaii. But there's long been a conspiracy theory that says something different. Now, the bombs that fell on Pearl Harbor military base provided a spark that lit the fire of the American war machine in the 1940s. And that fire has been burning ever since. U.S. Armed Forces has been in almost perpetual conflict in one form or another ever since that day. It's easy to trace back a lot of the world's major wars today as emanating from that one fateful day. Well, our official understanding of the attack on Pearl Harbor has become famous as one of history's preeminent surprise attacks. The story's been told and retold many times. At first, during the broadcasts and speeches of American politicians, then by the journalists reporting on the war, and then by the history textbooks after the fight was over. And finally, by the mainstream media, who turned the story into a big-budget Hollywood blockbuster. Anybody who looks briefly into the attack can surmise that Japan appeared suddenly and violently at the base and left the U.S. with no other option than to avenge their fallen comrades and enter into the Pacific arena of World War II. Yeah, that's what we've been told. Well, there's actually the possibility that there's more to the attack than meets the eye. Rather than a surprise attack, It's highly possible U.S. High Command knew about the attack, simply let it happen. It was used to provide them with a perfect reason to get into the war. Now, we all know that on the morning of December 7th, that was a Sunday morning, the Imperial Japanese Navy launched an attack on Pearl Harbor, the American military base in Hawaii. It happened at 7:48 in the morning when a fleet of 353 Japanese aircraft appeared over the horizon. There were fighter planes and torpedo planes and bombers, all departing from 6 aircraft-carrying ships located some distance away. Those on the base had no idea that the Japanese were about to attack. Taken off guard, all the 8 battleships that were docked in the harbor were sunk. All in all, the Japanese managed to destroy a number of very expensive ships, nearly 200 aircraft, and over 2,400 American military personnel. They cost the Japanese only 64 men and did achieve their goal, striking a significant blow against American naval power in the Pacific. And just as shocked as the men at the base were by the attack, so was the American population back home. Until that point in time, we had been an isolationist country. We were looking at the British fighting the Germans. We'd always shake our head and go, tisk, tisk, how horrible that is, but I'm glad it's not us. Well, it was only a day later that war was declared by Congress. And after diddling around the periphery of World War II, we were involved in it, and we were celebrating our involvement. Any reticence the Americans might have had about intervening in the war evaporated overnight. Discussing the United States history of isolationism, historians have noted that domestic support skyrocketed after the attack. Well, previous to Pearl Harbor, the U.S. had offered a form of hidden support for the Allied powers fight against fascism. So-called neutrality patrol was just one example of this. It was a pact formed between the U.S. and the U.K. to establish a neutral zone in the Atlantic Ocean. While ostensibly refusing to offer outright support for either side, the patrol offered a biased form of protection for the U.K. Even if the exact phrasing of the neutrality patrol offered protection for all ships in neutral waters, it was a great benefit to the British. Without entering into World War II, the U.S. was attempting to use economic and military influence to offer support in other fashions. Among its population, citizens were split between their desire to combat the rise of the Imperial Japanese Army and the Nazis. And as the preeminent world power, even in those days, the U.S. was standing by and watching as Europeans were smashing one another into the ground. The attack on Pearl Harbor arrived and provoked the isolated power of the Americans to enter into the war. With the balance of power hurtling back and forth between the Allies and the Axis powers, the arrival of the U.S. was certainly a game changer. For Japan, the attack seemed like a poor choice. Now, this wasn't necessarily the case, of course. For those in charge of the Japanese military, the disparity between American forces and their own was stark. Now, the attack on Pearl Harbor wasn't intended to beat the Americans, but rather to buy time. As has been discussed by historians L.M. Cullen and Edward Drea, the U.S. had long been noted as being the likely foe for Japanese future. And as early as the 1920s, plans had been made to deal with the American Navy. Japanese strategy was to slow down the American Navy and implement a ring defensive strategy, which protected Japan by erecting outposts throughout the Pacific arena. With the American Navy temporarily out of the picture, Japan could fortify and secure these posts and protect against an American invasion. And any attempt to break through the ring would incur high American casualties. Japanese thought these casualties would demoralize the Americans and give them pause for thought when entering into a war with America. To say that Japan badly misunderstood and underestimated American reaction was a huge understatement. Admiral Soroku Yamamoto made a statement regarding the 1941 attack on Pearl Harbor that proved very appropriate. He said, "I fear all we've done is to awaken a sleeping giant and fill him with a terrible resolve." And that turned out to be the case. Well, the attack on Pearl Harbor then, in the Japanese estimation, was just the first step Americans would eventually use their Air Force and atomic bombs was not accounted for in Japanese plans that were literally decades old at the time of the attack. With surprise being a key element of the plan, Japan hoped the U.S. fleet would be disabled long enough to put Japan's defenses in place. And there is a theory, it's never been proven, that suggests that the American High Command were not just aware of the upcoming Japanese attack, but they welcomed it. Historians have discussed this matter at length, and while the theory does remain outside the realms of typically accepted discourse, there's been a huge amount written on the subject, and the argument hinges on a number of very key factions. Now, the first of these is a possibility that the American intelligence operatives had already cracked the codes being used by the Japanese. There were actually two groups working on crypto analysis at the time: the Navy's Office of Naval Intelligence, Crypto Group, and the Army's Signal Intelligence Services. By 1941, these groups had worked to break a number of the Japanese ciphers and codes, allowing them to read a large amount of the Japanese diplomatic communications. Now, not all the codes had been broken, of course. Manpower is hard to come by, while the Japanese to English translators who the government trusted were worked into the ground. Irv Newman notes that the U.S. has just over 700 people working on the codes. It enjoyed some degree of success. Now, the most important code was named JN-25 and was used by the Japanese Navy. And there's been some debate as to the extent of just how many of the Japanese Navy communications the Americans could read. But Lieutenant Honest John Leitweiler asserted in 1941 that he and his staff were able to walk right across the by now readable code. And once that code was readable, simply a case of being able to hope the right messages were being intercepted, decrypted, and analyzed in time to make them useful. One suggestion is that none of the messages gathered prior to December 7th mentioned Pearl Harbor specifically, but rather mentioned an attack on a grand scale. Messages that were gathered haven't yet been declassified. Whether this was an attempt to cover up prior knowledge of the attack or the messages simply didn't exist is impossible to tell at this point. But we know the Americans could read and decrypt Japanese Navy messages, and for such a large-scale attack as attacking Pearl Harbor, it seems strange to consider the surprise with which we seem to be caught. Now, one of the hints we get is there was at least an awareness of an upcoming attack on an American military base. That came from officials inside our government. One such person is Vice Admiral Frank Beatty, then an aide to the Secretary of Navy and part of the President's inner circle. Writing about it in 1954, he commented that before the attacks, it seemed obvious the Japanese were being backed into a corner. It was a move constructed intentionally by President Roosevelt and Prime Minister Churchill. Beatty considers the conditions laid out to the Japanese to be so extreme they're impossible to meet. By setting impossible targets for the Japanese to beat in order to avoid a war, it made our participation in World War II an inevitable event. Though the similar account comes from Henry Stimson, Secretary of War in 1941. He wrote in his diary at the time he had a meeting with the president and discussed the possibility of war with Japan. In response to this, they wondered about the idea of how best to maneuver Japan into firing that first shot while minimizing the risk to the U.S. His diaries also revealed that those in charge of Pearl Harbor were warned of an attack, and the fact they were not ready came as a complete surprise to Stimson. However, Stimson's diary leaves out one key part of any warning that was given to the personnel at Pearl Harbor, namely the instruction that they were not warn any members of the civilian population. Declassified in 1944, the McCullum Memos, another indication the U.S. wished to figure out how to arrange for the Japanese provocation that would allow them to enter into the war. Memos submitted in 1940 broke down 8 ways in which America could coerce Japan into attacking. Famous line in the document says if Japan can be led to commit an overt act of war, so much the better. Noted academic Gore Vidal described the memo as the smoking gun, detailing America's intention to lure the Japanese into attacking, creating an untenable political situation that left Japan with little option but to put into action their defensive ring plan. The actions described in the memo include suggestions to give aid to China, move military forces into Dutch bases across East Asia, and embargo all trade with Japan in tandem with the British. Well, this memo became infamous following the attack, which some have doubted whether it ever reached the office of the president. But what it does tell us, though, is that there was a certain feeling in the American military that war was inevitable. Pearl Harbor was an obvious target, and that if possible, Japan should be encouraged to strike first and provide the pretext needed for us to get into the war. Well, the theory of the American government knowing about the attack on Pearl Harbor in advance suggests a conspiracy lurking in the intelligence community. At the heart of the theory is the suggestion that though President Roosevelt strongly desired to enter into the war, he just needed an excuse. Military historian Thomas Fleming suggested though Roosevelt had been encouraging Japan to strike the first blow, he had been expecting the loss of life and infrastructure to be quite so severe as it turned out to be. Added to this, the arrangements of treaties and alliances between Japan and Nazi Germany meant that when the U.S. did declare war on Japan, the day after the attack, Adolf Hitler was going to declare war on the U.S. Having wrapped up the world in a Gordian knot of diplomatic interplays, the Pearl Harbor attack allowed President Roosevelt to swiftly and decisively get us into the World War. Well, this conspiracy theory in this incident seems to have gained more than a grain of truth to it. It also seems to suggest the full scale of the attack shocked our government. It was not within the plan to lose over 2,000 men, but a lack of preparedness and failure to communicate between the different government departments meant that the military's encouraging a Japanese attack brought forth a far greater blow than they had imagined. While it's likely the American government knew an attack was coming and had essentially arranged for this to happen, the attack on Pearl Harbor was much worse than they had imagined. Nevertheless, the plan did succeed, and within a week, the U.S. was at war with the Axis powers. Well, sometimes it's a case of be careful what you wish for. You just might get it. You know, one of the overarching themes of this conspiracy is the concept of the clandestine powerful organizations that are preventing the wider population from knowing the truth about what was going to happen. Now, this is usually a government or a corporation, but organizations don't come much more powerful than the Catholic Church. This next conspiracy theory we're going to examine is the theory that the church has long been the front for a far more menacing purpose than you might have imagined. After being in existence for over 2 millennia, it should come as no surprise to see the Catholic Church as a target for many conspiracy theories. And while its power might be somewhat diminished these days, at times it's been the most powerful organization in the world. There are few forces more compelling than belief, and events such as the Crusades, the Spanish Inquisition, and La Conquista show just how influential Catholicism has held at various points in human history. With the fame of the church, the story of its foundation is just as well known as the core canon of Christian mythology. Following the death of Jesus Christ, his apostles were instructed to continue his work, a process that's retold in the Bible's Acts of the Apostles. And of all his disciples, it was Peter who was chosen as the rock on which Jesus would build his church. According to some scholars, it was Peter who became the very first head of the church, known as the Bishop of Rome. This position, otherwise known as the Pope, would become the leader of the Christian world for centuries. And over time, the position evolved, became refined until the Catholic Church grew into the dominant religious force in the Western world. And while historians such as Oscar Cullmann and Henry Chadwick and Raymond Brown have debated whether the history of the church is quite so simple, the essential lineage of the church in the modern age is fairly accepted. Even today, the power that resides in Vatican City is obvious to anybody who visits, and the influence of both the Pope and the Church itself still felt on a global scale. Or so we're told. While movements such as the Reformation have cast aspersions on the religious reliability of the Catholic doctrine, others have come forward to actively accuse the Church of being set up for a far more nefarious purpose. Maybe the best known of these, and an important historical conspiracy theory, which I only recently learned about, is become known as the Two Babylons theory. And that was the title of a pamphlet written in the 19th century by a Scottish theologian named Alexander Hislop, who was a noted member of the Scottish Presbyterian Free Church. He wrote the text in 1853, giving it the subtitle of Papal Worship, proved to be the worship of Nimrod and his wife. take nearly 70 years before the piece would be published in its entirety. And to put Hislop's allegations in simple terms, he accused the Catholic Church of being an organization secretly controlled by the ancient pagan religion of Babylon. Scottish ministers suggested rather than the teachings of a man named Jesus Christ, the entire church was simply a front for ancient religion and the result of a conspiracy almost 2,000 years old. And though it's not as well known today, the city of Babylon was once the cultural center of the world. Located in the ancient area of Mesopotamia, currently what we call Iraq, rose to a position of huge significance in the 17th century BC. Home to the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, one of the ancient wonders of the world, and was the capital of the Babylonian Empire. At various points in its history, historians have suggested it was the largest city in the world. Like a lot of ancient empires, it rose to power and eventually fell away, eventually becoming part of the growing Muslim caliphate in the 7th century. But before then, though, it was its own complicated religion and culture. And despite the importance of ancient Babylon on the contemporary world stage, we know relatively little about their specific religious beliefs. This belief system influenced Christianity is not limited to Hislop's work. We do know the Babylonian religion was largely influenced by the nearby Sumerian religions, as well as even more ancient mythology scattered around the region. What we know is from clay tablets that have been recovered. They've been translated through a number of languages and passed down, eventually reaching us today. Essentially, it's a collection of myths and legends that give us a vague outline of the belief system itself. And one of the most important, known as Enuma Elish, was a creation myth detailing how the Babylonians believed the world came into being. One of the religion's most noted scholars, Alfred Jeremias, has put forward the theory that these collections of myths would form the basis of the Hebrew Bible, a book that would eventually form much of the Old Testament. Maybe the closest parallels between the Babylonian religion and the Christian religion can be found in both Mesopotamian texts and the book of Genesis. The idea of a shapeless void filled with nothing but water being turned by a divine creator into the world is found in both books. In Enuma Elish, 6 generations of gods create the world, each of whom is associated with a specific element of the creation. It's similar to the 6 days taken by God to create different elements of the world in Genesis. In both texts, the 7th generation or 7th day is associated with rest. And as well as this, both the Epic of Gilgamesh and the Bible contain stories in which mankind is denied the chance of immortality due to an evil intervention of a serpent. Now, both of these books contain stories about the loss of humanity's innocence, as well as a great flood that killed huge numbers of the population. And further parallels between characters like Emish and Enton, with Cain and Abel, have been noted, as well as the similar characteristics of the Old Testament God and the deity of the Babylonian and Sumerian text. Influence of the ancient religions on the old Hebrew text are undeniable, but how do they add to the theory that the Catholic Church was simply a vessel through which this religion could continue long after the death of the Babylonian culture? Alexander Hislop begins his paper by tracing back the history of the doctrine of the Catholic Church. There's a key story in the Old Testament that actually features the city of Babylon. Hislop's journey back through the church leads him to the story of the Tower of Babel, where groups of people gathered together and found a new city. They decided to build a tower so big it'll reach heaven, a move that angers God. The deity destroys the Tower of Babylon and scatters the people across the earth, making it so they'd never be able to understand each other's words again. This is a reason given for the abundance of languages and cultures around the globe. As well as the Old Testament, the story has similar precedents and cultures throughout the Near East and Middle East. Accordingly, people have tried to associate the tower with buildings known to have existed at that point, including structures made by the Sumerians, the Egyptians, and even the Babylonians. For Hislop, though, the key association is the tower's relationship with the biblical figure of Nimrod. Now, Nimrod was an ancient king who had been described as a magnificent hunter. He's featured in the Bible and ancient Hebrew texts and is known as the man who was king of people who attempted to build the Tower of Babel. And for centuries, people have tried to link Nimrod with actual figures from the Mesopotamian religion and described him as a Babylonian king. Hislop, however, asserts that Nimrod was worshipped as a god. He positions Nimrod as the center of the Babylonian religion and suggests this pagan worship continued through to 0 BC and into the centuries beyond. While reading through the book of Revelations, Alexander Hislop associates the worship of Nimrod and the pagan religion of the Babylonians with the so-called Whore of Babylon. Now, the whore is described as an evil figure, one of the abominations of the earth, and the Whore of Babylon is one of the harbingers of the apocalypse and represents a huge, powerful, but unnamed force that exists in the world. While some people associated the figure with the Roman Empire or with Queen Elizabeth, Hislop's assertion the whore is actually the Catholic Church itself. But now comes the question of how does he make the leap from an ancient Babylonian king who ruled centuries before the birth of Christ to the preeminent representation of the world's most popular religion? Well, in the Two Babylons, Hislop's put forward his idea the church wasn't founded as the basis to spread the ideas of Jesus of Nazareth, but rather to continue the ideas that had been passed down by Nimrod. While forms of true Christianity existed and taught the lessons of Jesus, Hislop himself was a Presbyterian, the Catholic Church was simply a vessel through which the ancient Babylonian paganism could be passed down to new generations. One of the chief allegations of his book is that the Pope, or the position of the Holy See, is actually the lineal representative of Belshazzar, who was the last ruling king of Babylon. And before the city fell to the Persians, a message from God appeared to Belshazzar at a feast, and it was described in the book of Daniel. His paganism was converted into the religion of the Israelites. But rather than a true conversion, this worship of the pagan gods of Babylon was preserved and mixed with the foundation of the Catholic Church. While Belshazzar went into hiding following the fall of Babylon, this suggests he simply ingrained his ideas into a lineage that eventually became the high seat of Catholicism. And as such, Alexander Hislop suggests the entire Catholic doctrine is built on a foundation of lies and misinterpretations, and it's only going to lead to the fall of Christianity. It's not just Babylonian paganism that Hislop traces to the church. Another of his claims relates the Egyptian gods to some of the foremost symbols and sayings of the Catholic institutions. Catholicism, the Christograms are three letters used to start the three names of Jesus Christ. And these three letters act as a monogram, a quick way to write the name of the Catholic Savior. The letters in the language used by the church are IHC, standing for In Hoc Signo, meaning Jesus, Savior of Men. Hislop, though, suggests that these are simply abbreviations of the Egyptian gods of Isis, Horus, and Seth. Now, the cover's provocative, again making use of iconography to bring together the Star of David, the number of the beast, and the word human. And throughout, Hislop makes an effort to suggest that all Catholic ceremonies, philosophies, and doctrines are simply a conspiratorial effort to continue the pagan religion of ancient Babylon. Despite the enduring nature of the Two Babylon theory, a lot of modern academics have been quick to dismiss the paper. They suggest there are many misinterpretations of both history and the Catholic religion, as well as a number of serious fabrications to take away from the believability of the piece. In particular, Ralph Woodrow's annotated version of the original text does a good job of highlighting Hislop's many errors and providing context for his claims. That's not to say the theory is without its followers, though. It's become particularly popular among Christians of rival denominations, including Protestant fundamentalists, and been discussed at length at the Watchtower, the most famous publication of the Jehovah's Witnesses. And even though Alexander Hislop's theory lacks the evidence required to make it a truly convincing conspiracy theory, its publication in 1919 goes to show the long history of alternative theories we have in our culture. Despite the multiple denouncements of the theory's truth, there is still a large number of people who don't not only know about, but believe in the theory of the Two Babylons. Well, from religious mysteries, let's turn to something a little bit more down to earth, so to speak. The imposed death of the electric car. From one of the world's oldest institutions to the forefront of modern technology, a conspiracy theory can cover almost every part of human culture. One of the world's largest industries, and as a result, its most profitable, is the primary target for conspiracy theories of the world. The automotive industry has long been home to a lot of dubious practices. From Henry Ford's theories of a worldwide Jewish conspiracy, he wrote a pamphlet called The International Jew, to the current Volkswagen board of directors who covered up a huge emissions scandal in favor of turning higher profits. Car manufacturers have been on the wrong side of the moral fence on a number of occasions. And never has this been truer than when the nature of their business was threatened. And while we may look at companies like Tesla and see the modern-day success of electric vehicles, it's not always the case. Recently, it's come to light that a cabal of automotive giants may have conspired to slow down the progress of the electric car. As detailed in the award-winning documentary Who Killed the Electric Car, the arrival of a working, viable electric car may well have been held up by those who already dominated the automotive industry. But how can such a huge leap forward have been suppressed for so long? Would become a major question I'd ask. Well, the history of the electric car is not a recent story. Rather, the attempt to create a viable working electric vehicle for the masses is something that's existed nearly as long as the concept of the car itself. For the last 100 years, various electric-powered vehicles have been demonstrated, but until recently, none had truly succeeded. In their place, the internal combustion engine dominated the market, and a number of huge international corporations held onto huge sectors of the market. Dominance of brands like General Motors and Toyota and Ford has led to the production of millions of cars every year and has resulted in billions and billions of dollars of annual profit. The fossil fuel car industry is big business, and for a number of companies, there's little inclination to change a working formula. In other words, if it's not broke, don't fix it. But the arrival of the electric car was something of an inevitability. Over the years, over 5,000 different concepts and ideas have been put forward and tested by some of the world's biggest automotive manufacturers. And factors such as the American oil crisis in the 70s and numerous wars in the Middle East and the acknowledgement of global warming has made the turn to renewable, more eco-friendly options inevitable. So the question becomes, why did it take so long and so many attempts to create electric vehicles that actually work? To illustrate the existence of the conspiracy, the General Motors EV1 is typically used as an example. Unlike the majority of electric cars produced by major automotive firms who produce electric car concepts, the EV1 actually made it to the market. Now, it wasn't a widespread release by any means. It was available to people in Southern California on a lease option. And part of this availability came down to a mandate passed in 1990 required the major car companies to make electric cars available to the public as an attempt to spur their development. And as such, GM and Honda and Nissan and Ford and the other large manufacturers were forced to create and develop electric vehicles if they wanted to continue selling cars. Despite the fact the original mandate had been passed in 1990 and prompted the development of many electric vehicles, a conspiracy began to emerge during the 1990s. Gradually, the political prompts that had been designed to encourage research were appealed. And though it was shielded away from the mainstream media, the California Air Resources Board was at the center of the vehicle manufacturers' efforts to push back legal efforts to bring the low-emissions vehicles to market. In addition to the pressure from the lobbying groups of the automotive industry, legal work was again filed again and again. Well, as the car makers, representatives of the oil industry backed the legislative appeal, while the representatives in the media began to build the hype for a much mooted hydrogen car. Even though the electric cars were available, it was the futuristic hydrogen cars that were meant to be the solution to all the problems. But they were nowhere near ready. The courts were told the electric cars were not ready, were not wanted, and the imminent arrival of the hydrogen models will be the real answer to the problem. And that's where the EV1 comes in. EV1 was a much maligned vehicle, though only available in a small market. The demand for the car was incredibly low, almost to the point of being non-existent. General Motors, one of the world's biggest car manufacturers, had released a car that was supposedly purposely bad. Well, nobody wanted the car, chiefly because it was bad. General Motors could take this lack of demand to the legal boards and use it as evidence, and nobody wanted to purchase an electric car. And as such, GM took all the EV1s back to the factory and destroyed them. In fact, the cars were recalled during their leases, much to the disapproval of the people who were driving them. And these owners even organized a protest to try and stop the cars from being taken away from them, though GM didn't listen, and almost every single EV1 cubed model has become emblematic of the extent to which the automotive giants would go in order to prevent the reality of the electric car, replacing their traditional internal combustion engines. So why might the oil and automotive corporations enter into a conspiracy to keep the electric car from becoming a feasible prospect? As proposed in the work Who Killed the Electric Car, the oil industry faced the issue of losing out on the revenues to be gained from the wealth of public vehicles that might be replaced by electric counterparts. And similarly, Wally Ripple suggested automotive manufacturers are incredibly concerned about the short-term impact electric car projects would have on their profits, well as any future loss to revenues that might be incurred from an unsure future. With shareholders to please, profit remained ultimate. The electric car was a threat to those profits, was accordingly seen as a threat. However, representatives from the industry itself have claimed there was a genuine lack of interest in the vehicles produced by the companies during this period, with Dave Barthmus suggesting EV1 was truly not wanted by customers and was an indication of the entire automotive market. These cars cost a lot of money, can only travel up to 100 miles on a single charge. As well as this, the prospect of the hydrogen vehicles is very much a pipe dream. In addition to mounting legal pressures that were applied to the California Air Resources Board. California's got a board for everything, don't you know? A great deal of money was poured into raising awareness of the potential of hydrogen technology. These vehicles are heralded as the saviors of the not-too-distant future. Zero-emission cars were preferable to the automotive industry as they're very much under the industry's control. But they were always still a few years from the market. As the public got more and more excited about the prospect of the hydrogen fuel cells, they soon learned to admonish the rival electric cars. Hydrogen was pushed as the answer, while the electric option was made to seem untenable in both the courts and the public's perception. In this case, the conspiracy theories believed that the profits of the automotive and oil industries were the cause of the setbacks in the development of the electric car during the 90s. As such companies controlled the car industry and felt threatened by the prospect of a new technology. In order to preserve their revenue streams, they pretended to value the development of the electric car, promoted the doomed hydrogen technology as an impending savior, and ground down the legal frameworks that was set up to try and encourage the eco-friendly alternatives. And by the turn of the millennium, the gears were already in motion and the arrival of the electric car had been suitably slowed. In collusion with government officials, the mandates requiring environmental options had been repealed and the car manufacturers no longer required to develop such alternatives. However, while sources such as Who Killed the Electric Car have been firm in their suggestion that the conspiracy does exist, it's still very much a theory. Thankfully, we've now reached a moment in time in which the conspiracy against the electric car is no longer holding us back. And thanks to legitimate, eco-friendly options such as the Toyota Prius and the Tesla Roadster, we can now actual vehicles only available to the public to purchase, but they really do work. And even with the automotive and oil industries turning huge profits in the modern age, the age of the conspiracy against the electric car seems to have passed. Only question that remains is how much damage we've done to the environment in the time since the conspiracy first began. Well, on that note, we come to the end of today's show. We'll be back tomorrow and talk about more conspiracy theories you may not have heard of. Until then, this is Ken Hudnall for the Ken Hudnall Show saying have a truly great evening.